is the First-Time Homebuyer Workshop, and I am Margaret Capranos. I am a realtor. I've been in business for resale and new home construction for about 14 years. I also have my colleagues, Sean.
My name's Sean Murphy. I work for a local lender here in Marin. I've been in the mortgage business now for 12 years. 1 year, the last year at this new lender, we're one of the top lenders in the country. I'm local, born and raised here in Marin.
And Eric.
And my name is Eric Lacey. I am the founder of Apollo Credit and Finance Solutions. I've been a credit specialist specifically for almost 8 years now, and I would also like to add that I am a local boy, having grown up on Hamilton Air Force Base, going to San Marin High School. In fact, my brother still teaches there. Yeah.
Go Mustangs.
Go Mustangs.
There you go.
Bob Lacey, there you go. There you go. I figured I'd get one.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for coming, and we went ahead and asked most of you what were some of the pressing issues that you had. What I'm going to ask in terms of format, since we are filming this, we do actually have an hour's worth of content between the three of us. I'd like to ask you, for the most part, to hold questions, because there will be a second part. That's why you have the index cards on the table. You also have this first-time home buyer on the back. This is an excellent piece of paper for taking notes. I will have these slides available if you would like to get those. Now, one of the things that we're not here to do is to promote ourselves, and that was one of the stipulations of being here at the library. Now, if we're not able to answer any of your questions and you feel that you would like to have, one-on-one or more information, you're free to contact us, but we are not going to be contacting you, so don't worry about that. So with that, just as a quick overview, I'm going to start off just talking briefly about the market, the status of the market. I'm going to be covering Marin County, as actually Novato, as well as Petaluma, because those are two areas that are first-time homebuyer markets. I'll be talking about what a first-time home buyer is and is not. And then I'll be turning it over to Eric, who's going to be talking about credit. What is credit? He's going to give you all the ins and outs, much more than what I can give you here. Then we're going to turn it back to Sean. We're going to try to keep this a little bit interesting, both for you as well as for the viewers. So we're kind of bouncing back and forth a little bit. And Sean's going to be talking about the lending process. So he has a lot of information. So you could expect to hear from me for a few minutes, 10 minutes for Eric, 10 minutes or so for Sean. Then we're going to come back to me, and I'm going to really get in depth about the real estate process. How to compete in a market like this. What are strategies to approach sellers for negotiating? We're going to cover quite a bit of material. So that is the format. And with that, the first question really is rent versus buy. And I would like to encourage you to write down the realtor.com/mortgage/tools rent or buy calculator. It's an interactive calculator. And with that, for example, with whatever you may be paying in rent right now, you could go ahead and see with a certain down payment what type of a mortgage payment you might be able to afford. Now, I would prefer you go see Sean in the long run, or someone like Sean, but this is just for you to begin to play with, to get a sense of, well, if I'm paying $2,500 a month in rent, what about if I were to consider the benefits of getting a mortgage instead? And that fun little calculator is interactive and will let you play with that. Now, generally overall, you have lower monthly expenses with rent. Especially when you first start to buy, you're going to have higher monthly expenses than you previously did, but theoretically that is supposed to taper off. Buying a home is considered a long-term investment. If you're planning on living there for only 2 or 3 years, you're probably better off renting. That is another benefit to renting, is that you can pick up and go wherever and whenever you want to. When you own a home, you tend not to do that. You tend to be fairly established. Now, the downside to renting is that you don't get the benefit of mortgage deductions, which are significant. That helps to offset your mortgage payment. We'll be talking more about that with Sean. And the biggest issue is there's no appreciation whatsoever. Your landlord is getting that appreciation, but you are not. Now that is the benefit that you get. And I have an example up here. 1109 Clayton just sold, it's not that far from here, just a few months ago for $541,500. The seller who sold it bought it in 2004. He bought it for $450,000. So that was up 5.8%. Now let's say he had been in the stock market for that period of time. If he was diligent about, putting that money into the stock market and letting it grow, maybe he could have done 6 to 8% over that same period of time. And the stock market and the real estate market both suffered a significant downturn in the 2007-2008 crash. So that has to be factored in. So that 5.8% really isn't that bad, considering that we went through such a significant downturn. The other thing is that while rents go up, in fact, over the past 2 years, rents have gone up 36% in Marin County, whereas if you are able to get a fixed loan, your payments stay constant. So these are the benefits you have to weigh, as to whether or not this works for you or not. So the face of home ownership. Gen X, Gen Y, which many of you in the room are, what's going on here is that you represent pretty much 2/3 of the market for first-time home buyers. And in terms of both Gen X and Gen Y, kind of like what had happened during the Depression era, both of these generations have experienced significant downturns. So they come with issues, either it's a lot of credit card debt, or for the Gen Ys, it's a lot of school debt. And these are impediments for being able to save for a down payment and get into a home. So that's what we'll be addressing as well. And what ends up happening, and this is, I'm going to start to set the stage for setting expectations for buyers. What ends up trumping all other things is the affordability. And I heard somebody say that, they were priced out of the market here. So even though you may want a greenhouse, even though you may want 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, single family, detached with a great yard, close to the downtown, one of the things that you'll have to start playing with is want versus need, just to start setting a little bit of the expectation for what can I afford. So affordability is, trumps pretty much everything. Now, this is a California Association of Realtors. 44% of all the baby boomers born between 1946 and 64, 44% of them are planning on leaving the state. And the reason they cite this is because they can't afford to live here. They're looking at fixed income. Now, for the Gen X, Gen Y, that presents a golden opportunity, because one of the issues that we have going on here is we don't have enough inventory. Now, the other thing that presents a great opportunity is, given the income range that the baby boomers have versus Gen X, Gen Y, they actually can be a very good source of down payment or family assistance. We'll be talking about that as well. Now, one of the key things that we really need to ask is, are we in a buyer's market or a seller's market? And there are real definitions for what that looks like. The biggest key is inventory. How much inventory is out there? Currently, if you were to look at this, these were stats that I just pulled from the MLS yesterday. We have in Nevada 1.6 months of inventory. That clearly puts this into a seller's market. So the seller is sitting there thinking, I can get the most money possible, I can have my terms, I want to rent back, I don't want to do any repairs, I want the buyer to take it as is. That's a seller's market. Now let's go down to Sausalito, where there's 5.8 months worth of inventory. Now take a look at the difference in price per square foot. Sausalito is $810 per square foot. Nevada is $387 a square foot. So you can see there's a lot of pressure on this market. So down in Sausalito, what's starting to happen is buyers are going, well, I see there's a little bit more inventory here. I think we'll take our time looking. And oh, by the way, I think we're going to ask the seller to do some repairs if we find anything that needs to be done. They start to get a little bit more picky, but in reality, that 5.8 months is kind of a neutral market. It really isn't until you get to about 7 or 8 months worth of inventory that then you are in a solid buyer's market. So that becomes one of the drivers of how you approach the market as a first-time home buyer. We'll come back to that and talk about this a little bit more. What I thought was interesting, Sean, if you could go back one sec. If you look at Petaluma's price per square foot is $387. That's, of all the sales. And they have 1.5 months worth of inventory. So even though, I'm going to show you later that there's a lot more inventory out there, there's actually more pressure on that market right now. And there's not that much difference square foot wise between Novato and Petaluma on an average per square foot. And if we go up to Santa Rosa, we've now driven that cost down to $318 a square foot, which could be sizable. But then again, we only have 1.7 months worth of inventory, so sellers still maintain the advantage there. So that's a little teaser I'm going to leave you with. And at this point now, we're going to turn that over to Eric.
You can go ahead and go past that one. One quick point that I neglected to make in terms of my introduction. I'd also like to add that I have started a real estate company, and I spent about 6 years in the mortgage industry, both on the wholesale and the retail side. So while my business at this point really focuses on business owners and helping them understand creditability from a business standpoint, this is my roots in terms of home buyers, mortgages, in terms of my expertise in credit. Go ahead. Oh, nope. I like to have fun. If the tie wasn't a giveaway, the smile hopefully will be. My goals for the day, have some fun, share my expertise. I am incredibly passionate about what I do, and hopefully a few ahas, and hopefully some more questions at the end of our presentation, or later, because credit is a deep subject. Creditum is, I'm going to go through this real quick. Creditum is Latin for credit. Credit to me means creditability and what you can do with that creditability, and I'm not just talking about a FICO score, although for these purposes today, that's the word of the day when it comes to credit. Ultimately, having creditability gives access to financing, which ultimately allows achieving dreams and goals. Go ahead. These are the stories that I could spend a lot of time on. Nope. I said I could spend a lot of time on them, not a short period.
Yeah, that was quick.
I'm not going to go in depth because I could. The welcome wagon, it was started literally horse and buggy days. It was a means by which, and I've got a young lady nodding back here, but it was a means by which those who had money sent people out to greet those into the community. But really, it wasn't an altruistic manner that they were coming to the new families in town. It was to scope out what they had, to see how credible they were. What kind of clothes were they wearing? What kind of cutlery did they have? How did they act? How was their diction? All of those things. And that went into a file. And that actually came, it grew up into the welcome wagon, where they literally had people in white station wagons driving around the neighborhoods. And again, you're back there shaking your head, so I'm getting some confirmation.
I was born then.
There you go. This young lady knows it. But they literally drove around neighborhoods sharing pies and casseroles and doing the same thing and gathering the information, taking it back to the local banker, putting it in a file at the local bank. And all of a sudden, Mr. Fair and Mr. Isaac in 1950 said, you know what, there's a business here. So they monetized that data and created an algorithm or a math equation that took all of the data that was interesting to those who had money when it came to risk assessment and lending decisions, and they coined it the FICO score. And we could go in depth in that one. The FICO score ranges from 350 to 850. 850 is the high side. Some in here have 800 plus. I was just shown. Congratulations. And this is a little bit of a tease. The credit score that you can get online is not always the credit score that a mortgage professional has available to him or her, because it is weighing the data differently. And we'll come back to that one. It wasn't until the 1990s that California actually spurred on our ability as consumers to see our credit, to see our data. And at this point, we kind of see it, but we don't see it all. Keep on going. So, our credit report's a good judge of risk. My short take on it, professional and personal, is no, because not everything is reported. Who in here has a cell phone? Who in here pays their water bill? Who in here pays their electrical bill? Jokingly quip, I like the toilet to flush, so a little bit of humor there. Those type of payments and those types of consumer-vendor relationships are not readily, meaning month to month, reported to the bureaus. So it's a level of credibility or creditability that we have with our vendors as consumers that is not reported with those in particular until something goes wrong. So we're lacking credibility based on the lack of information. When it comes to the credit bureaus, ever so briefly, they make more money on us as consumers if we have a lower credit score. They make more money on us as consumers if we have a lower credit score because they sell our data to those who want to sell us stuff, cars for example, and almost categorically, those who sell those stuffs are going to offer financing or money down if we don't have a commensurate credit score to get 0 down, 0% financing. They're going to charge more for it. Therefore, the bureaus get to make more money off of selling our. Does that make sense? Yeah. Little conspiracy theory box there, and I'm going to leave that one alone at this point. And credit, when it comes to the reparation of and creating a positive profile, thus a positive score, it doesn't just mean deleting the bad stuff. Go ahead, next slide. How much time do I have?
Oh, probably 5 or so.
Excellent. Go ahead and leave it. Oh, go back one. I wish I had my remote.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's okay. Mute for me and a fast forward for you.
Yep.
When it comes to credit, this is a 5,000-foot level. And I could go in depth in each one of these. And I'm going to give you a broad brush in terms of what a decent credit profile looks like and what components or what activity plays into a positive credit profile and thus a positive credit score. The largest component is our payment history. Okay, it's everything that those consumer vendor relationships, those individuals, those companies have pushed up to the credit bureaus, and we're talking about TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian. They're the 3 major credit bureaus. When they hold it and a credit report is requested, that data is our payment history. It's our mortgage payment history, it's our cars, it's our credit cards, it's our student loans, it's also our collection accounts and any public record. So it's the good, bad, and ugly, okay? The most important thing to consider in this 35% piece of the credit pie is the date of the activity. It almost equates to what have you done for me lately. When it comes to credit scoring, the further in the past an alleged negative transgression, a late payment, from a scoring standpoint, the algorithm wants to know what you've been up to the past 6, 12, 18 months. So it weighs the data more heavily the more recent it is. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. The takeaway on this one, and I'm just going to give these away, and you probably already know this, you pay our bills on time, and you've got a good record when it comes to that. Go ahead, next one. So the next piece of the credit pie is 30%, and it's our debt ratio. And at this point, we're talking about the amount of credit that we have available versus the amount of credit that we're using. So we've got a $10,000 credit card. We're using $7,000 of it. Quick pop quiz here. What's our debt ratio? Go ahead. 70%. The short takeaway on this one is the higher the ratio, the fewer points were allotted. Many believe 50% is where you want to keep it to gain the most points. It's actually 29% or under. So $10,000 card, you have a $2,900 balance on it. That's where you want to be for optimization of the scoring in that component. Personally, pay the darn thing off. And that also plays into debt to income ratio and considerations from a mortgage professional. So keep those bad boys low. The next component, and the first 2 that I just mentioned are the ones that most people know about. Well, yeah, pay your bills on time and keep your credit cards low. Age of the credit, or how long we've had a credit established, is worth 15% of a credit score. Now, why does that matter? Well, it matters because the data that is gathered, and the more recent it is, the more quality and the more consideration it's given. So when does this come into play? If somebody cancels a credit card that they've held or opened in 1990, for example, and they have another credit card that they opened in 2010, their age of their open credit is diminished because they closed a very old account with a whole lot of data. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Keep your credit cards. And the next component, 10%, is the mix of credit, and that speaks to the different types of relationships, vendor relationships that we have. So a good mix of credit, for example, would be a mortgage. a car loan, a student loan, and 3 or 4 credit cards. It gives the opportunity for the algorithm to see that we can develop, maintain multiple relationships with multiple types of consumer vendors, obviously making the payments, but it gives us as consumers a broader base of credit ability or credibility, and thus a higher score. The narrower one gets with the amount of relationships, so if all you have is credit cards, the less data there is, the less credibility, thus the lower score. Last but not least, inquiries. Who here is afraid of inquiries? Who here is hurt? Okay. They're not all built. Boy, your hand shot up back there. Inquiries are not as bad as they've been made out to be, as long as you're working them appropriately. First and foremost, not all credit scores are built the same, and this plays into inquiries because a soft inquiry that we can do as consumers online, that is going to produce a score that is not based in risk. Therefore, 97% of the time it's going to be higher, sometimes considerably higher than a financial institution is going to have with the same data. So I really want you to keep that in mind, because many consumers come to buy a house and they say, hey, I've got an 828 credit score, but they get to the mortgage professional and the mortgage professional pulls it and the same data and their score is 740. It can be that significant a difference. Inquiries, there are 3 different types of FICO algorithms: mortgages, automobile, and credit cards. So the same data can come up with 3 different scores depending on what it is that's being sought. Does that make sense? Okay. Credit cards? Yeah. And we are now on version 9 of FICO. So there are 9 generations of it. Version 8 is being used, 9's coming out next year, but just understand that inquiries mean different things in terms of the different scores, and when it comes to installment loans, of which mortgages are one, within a 30-day period, you can go out and price shop, basically shop till you drop, and it will only count as one. If you do that with a credit card, it's wholly damaging, so just be careful. And with that, I'm sure I'm at my time. We'll go ahead and scoot through the rest of these, and we will allow Sean to come up and share his area of expertise.
Sure, no problem. Scrolling through here. Here we go.
There we go. I'll trade you seats.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So thank you all for being here today, and I think what our goal is to make sure to help educate you all on options available with regards to home ownership. And so what I like to do is be not a sales guy, I'm an educator and an informer, being able to teach people what their options are and being able to say, okay, here's what you can do based on your situation. And as we look at this, here we go, preparing, from the perception of where we are today, how do we prepare to buy a home? What are the credit basics that we're learning, as well as home financing and loan application process? As lenders, what are we considering? And for our purposes, we're looking at it: income, current debts, credit history that we just learned about, assets and available funds, not only for the down payment, but lenders are also going to want to see some money in reserve after you close. They actually don't want you to get too much of a mortgage. What if something happens once you buy the house and you don't have any money in reserve? Okay, so they want to make sure that they're doing good lending decisions, making sure that they're saying, yeah, this is someone who is a good person to lend money to. They're going to be paying us back on a regular basis, and they're not going to default on their loan, and we take back the home. We're not in the home ownership business, we're in the home lending business, so we want to make sure that we make good credit decisions for folks. And then we have to look at the collateral too. What is the property? Is it a condominium? Is it a townhome? Is it a 2-unit building, 3-unit building? For residential home financing, we'll go from 1 unit to 4 units. Okay, so these are the different options, things that we're looking for on a general basis as far as consideration. Benefits of pre-approval. When we talk about today's lending market, we already heard about how low inventory it is. How do you compete and how do you win in today's market? For the most part, when you're working on a team with a lender, with a realtor, your realtor is educating you on the local market areas that you want to look at buying and want to live in, and the lender's working with you on saying, okay, how can we win, and allowing you the best opportunity to win when homes become available. So for us, what we want to do is have that opportunity to take a look at where is your credit score, where is your income, where are your assets, how is down payment going to happen, what other debt that you have, so that we can put together a plan and say, okay, here's what we can get you qualified for, whether it's $200,000, whether it's $2 million. It gives you that idea, the confidence that, okay, I know I can get a loan. Now I have that chance to go out and shop. There are 3 levels that we look at from a pre-approval standpoint. Pre-qualify is very simply, I have the potential ability to possibly get this money to buy this home. Really isn't worth a whole lot more than the paper that it's written on, because there hasn't been any real scrutiny of your personal situation. When you provide a document like that to a seller and the listing agent, it's not going to have any weight in terms of your ability to qualify. You do need to take at minimum the next step and get pre-approved. And so by pre-approval, what we're looking at is a lender's going to go ahead and run your credit score. They're going to go ahead and look at the income documentation that you provided, the asset documentation you provided, and essentially put an application together and run it through an automated underwriting program that says, yep, if you provide and we back up all this documentation, yes, we can get you a loan. It has not been underwritten yet. It has not had an underwriter look at it, but it gives you that document that says, okay, we have been pre-approved when we submit an offer on a place. The last thing is an actual mortgage commitment. And we're doing that a lot these days with the employer that I work with, is that we're actually taking the full file, doing the automated underwriting program, and we're actually getting in front of an underwriter and saying, yep, this person is got the ability to qualify for this loan, okay? And so that allows that buyer to be able to compete better in today's market. The reason why is that they already have a loan. And so typically when they put an offer on a place, the standard California Association Realtor agreement is a 30-day close of escrow, and a 17-day appraisal contingency, and a 21-day loan contingency. So this is a 30-day window from start to finish of you agreeing to buy the home and you closing on owning that home. And in between, we're hitting benchmarks along the way. We got an appraisal on the property. It's worth what we agreed that it's worth. That's been signed off. We got the loan approval done. You can qualify for the loan, and now we're going to closing. Well, with a mortgage commitment letter, we've already done a large share of the legwork right there, and we can shorten those timelines up big time. And so if you're competing as a first-time home buyer with 5 or 6 other people on an offer, but you already have a commitment done, and you could go in with a 21-day close, that seller's going to say, I get my money that much quicker, and I get to move on. That might make your offer a little stronger in today's market.
And can I piggyback, if I may?
Please.
This is a very important part of being competitive in a market like this. I'd like to add to this by saying that a buyer with a loan versus a buyer with cash is different animals. Person with cash is looking for a discount. So for that seller who's looking for a high price, they may very well then turn to the person with the loan who can, within certain limits and parameters of the lender, be willing to offer what the seller would like to get. So that's a very important point to make, and I just wanted to emphasize the significance of this.
Indeed. And
and one last thing, to work with a local lender. If you have a lender in Connecticut or even Los Angeles, once again, you've diminished your compatibility. So I can't stress enough how you need to work with a local lender, because they understand this market.
Yep, and I will piggyback it further on that, is that when you are competing to win in today's market and have 5, 6, 7 offers on a property, if that listing agent happens to know the mortgage advisor and says, you know what, I've worked with them in the past, they've got deals done, they were easy to work with, they communicated with me, and I know what was going on, that does play into it. You become, you have a team that's working on your behalf as a first-time home buyer. The definition of first-time home buyer, you've never done this before. So you don't know what you're doing. It's scary, it's exciting, it's nervous, but you have a team of professionals that understand the local nuances of today's market to be able to help position you that opportunity to succeed, okay? And so as we spoke here, this is some of the benefits of pre-approval. Is the loan application process difficult? Loaded question in today's market. It can be, but I think what ends up happening here is that you are walking into sort of a second job, if you will. If you focus on this, my goal is to buy a home, and I need to do what it needs to take to get myself in a position to buy a home, then you'd spend the time to do the extra effort of getting all your ducks in a row, getting all the documentation together that's needed. And what does that mean? Well, if I am a W-2 wage earner, I'm looking at 30 days of pay stubs, 2 years of W-2s, bank statements, information of that nature. If I'm a self-employed person, which how many, 60%, 70% of Marin is self-employed, well, I do need 2 years of tax returns. And so that's an interesting dichotomy in the lending side, because you as a self-employed person get the value and the benefit of writing everything off on your taxes. I can deduct this, I can deduct that, I can, and show the government I made less money, and then I pay less taxes, okay? So, but the problem is, from the lending side, after what's happened in 2007 and 2008, every loan is fully documented. And so you get the benefit of saying, hey, I made $200,000 in my business, but I showed the government I made 60. Well, we're going to look at $5,000 a month as income to qualify. But I made $200,000. Well, you didn't run your business right. You wrote everything off, and you have all these expenses. So it's that interesting dilemma. So when you get into the time of the year and when you're doing taxes, there's some things that we can talk about that can help you, get around that. But it's definitely something that you need to be aware of. Okay, if you're able to provide this documentation up front and you're timely in returning of information, it doesn't have to be difficult. I mean, I've just finished closing a loan for a first-time home buyer. It took 21 days. So, okay, go ahead the next. So when you get, to the point when you're looking at closing, I think that what is important is, you need to know what are my final fees, how much is this cost going to be, and the excitement of signing loan documents, making sure that all our ducks are in a row.
I think we're going to speak more to this in a little bit. So at this point, we get to turn back to Eric.
And I'll go back. Which part of your slides?
How are the cookies? Everybody good at cooking? Are they good? Excellent.
Maybe we could pass the plate around if somebody wants more cookies.
The most important thing that I can share with you is part of the qualification process is credit qualifying. Knowing where you are in terms of your credit, even though it might not be the same exact score, is crucial to the process, actually. It's also an opportunity for you as consumers from a safety and security standpoint to make sure that you're not a victim of identity theft. Identity theft last year, I think, cost the United States consumers like $50 billion. It's just an insane amount of money, and it's very easy to monitor your credit. Local banks have the opportunity to monitor your credit through their processes. I preach once every 3 months, pull your credit if you're not going to sign on for monitoring. Do not live and die by that score, but at the very least, go through the items on your credit report and make sure that they're yours. From a statistical standpoint, and this is third-party research, the Bureau's Public Interest Research Group, anywhere from 15 to 79% of all credit reports out there have errors on them. 79%. That's a lot. Not all of them affect the score, but check your credit. And frankly, from a scoring standpoint, before you go to a mortgage professional, if it's 650 plus or minus on a consumer credit scale, there's probably a little work to be done. Now, what is a little bit of work to be done? Going back to that pie chart that I showed earlier, you think about the 5 components. The 2 that we really, as consumers, have the most control over are our payment history and then our debt ratio. So going into a process of getting pre-qualified, both from a debt-to-income ratio standpoint as well as a credit scoring standpoint, the simple suggestion is keep your credit cards paid off or as low as they possibly can, under that 29%. And if in the process of reviewing your consumer credit report or after you've gone to a mortgage professional and there are negative items on your credit, scrutinize them. Again, going back to the third-party research of so many credit reports out there having errors on them, credit reports are not easy to read. And frankly, I don't know what I did barely 2 months ago, let alone a year ago. And looking at a credit report and seeing possibly multiple alleged late payments, we as consumers have, under the protection of the Fair Credit Reporting Act, the ability to put the burden of proof for representing that data on our credit reports back onto the credit bureaus and back onto the data furnishers. Because unless it's, and this is written in the Fair Credit Reporting Act, unless it's 100% accurate, 100% verifiable, and reported in the proper time frame from a legal standpoint, they may not present it on a credit report. So scrutinize your credit reports. Now, if you find something that is questionable, not even outright wrong or erroneous, how do you go about tackling it? Good luck making a phone call to the credit bureaus. It snowballs chance and you know where in terms of getting a hold of somebody. There is a mechanism on each one of their websites, rather, to put in a dispute online. I strongly recommend against that. When it comes to any sort of dispute or process of seeking verification or validation of information that you question the validity of, write a letter and get ready for a process that may take months, frankly. The Fair Credit Reporting Act states that there must be and I'll use quotes, a reasonable investigation performed by the bureaus. It literally says reasonable. Now, what's reasonable to you is not reasonable to you, is not reasonable. So it's a wide interpretation. And I'm not going to get into the process, but if you have a desire to learn more about the process of a reasonable investigation that the bureaus perform, Google 60 minutes in the credit bureaus, and there's about a 45-minute segment on what investigations mean to them. It may irk you a little bit, and that's where I'll go back to. If there's questionable data, do it in writing. Expect it to take some time. They have, from a legal standpoint, 30 days from receipt of any inquiry or dispute to investigate that inquiry and get back to you. I would strongly recommend that to not be satisfied necessarily with that first response. Ask them to dig a little bit deeper because it's a somewhat automated process. Okay. A couple more of the takeaways from the standpoint of ensuring that you've got a good credit profile. Don't have too many credit cards. You know, if you've got credit cards upwards of 7, 8, 9, or 10, that's high-risk activity, especially if you have balances on them. Now, if you do have them, I would encourage you not necessarily to just cancel 4 or 5 to get it down to the suggested 3 or 4, but take a look at them and close them from the most recently opened back. Does that make sense? So you're maintaining the age of your credit. Now I'm going to tell you a quick story about the mix of credit. I spoke with a couple who could stand to bolster their mix of credit, and I suggested when they were ready to buy a new car that they consider financing it because they've paid cash for it. It would help their overall profile. And I get a call the next day from the wife, and she says, "Eric, you told him to go buy a car." I said, no, I didn't. Apparently that day the husband had gone out and bought a nice new Charger. I said, whoa, I didn't tell him to go do that. I said it would help. So when you're considering decisions, and this is also predicated on the fact that you do need assistance in bolstering if your scores are that 650 plus or minus, there are other areas in your profile, not just the negative, to pay attention to get the score that will qualify you. Now, Sean, any other mortgage professional is going to attest to this. Frankly, the higher the score, the less money you're going to pay for the loan, for the money you're borrowing. So the stronger you go in, the stronger you're going to come out. Okay.
Margaret?
Oh, well, we're ready here. Okay. Now we get to talk about something that's near and dear to my heart. Real estate agency, an otherwise rather dry topic, but I want to educate you about working with a real estate agent, because your idea of working with a real estate agent is very different than what my idea of is working with you. When I begin to work with you, I have a fiduciary relationship with you. However, until such time as you recognize that, you may think that all I'm doing is just putting you in the car and we're going around and we're looking at houses. And up to that point, what I have done is I've gone ahead and I've taken a look at your pre-approval, hopefully your pre-qualification. I've spent some time with you to get to know, and I actually have a little buyer questionnaire here that I'll go ahead and pass around as well. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be using my best expertise to try to match what you say you need with what is going to be out there in the marketplace. So we have begun to develop a relationship. Now, I'm acting in that capacity as a selling agent, so I would be representing the buyer. Now, let's say that on a Sunday you happen to walk into an open house, and that person who is there, oftentimes it is not the listing agent, it will be somebody who is in the listing agent's office who is hoping to be able to entice a buyer to work with them. But let's say that you've walked in and you've met the listing agent. The listing agent has a fiduciary relationship to the seller, and by this point they have actually signed a listing agreement that clearly spells out what that relationship is. Now, let's say, and here in the state of California, we are allowed to have what is called a dual agent, dual agency situation, such that a listing agent may say to you as a prospective buyer, I could help you. I have an inside, scoop on what the seller is interested in terms of price. That is actually a breach of that listing agent's fiduciary responsibility to the seller. And in the state of California, a dual agent cannot disclose to a buyer how much the seller is willing to take, nor can they disclose to a seller how much the buyer is willing to pay. So it's a very, very difficult situation for one person. I really want to stress this because the lack of education is such that buyers have walked in and they think they're getting a great deal by working with a listing agent. And a very big component of my job, whether I'm representing a buyer or a seller, is to make sure that I'm giving you my expertise. I've been here in the market for so many years. I've sold, helped people buy and sell houses, so I understand when I walk into a house, there may be foundation problems. I may not be an expert, but I see telltale signs. It would be my obligation to let you know that this is what I see. And there are a number of other things, whether it might be in a good school district, the things that affect the material fact and desirability of that property. It is up to me. I have a fiduciary responsibility to you to make sure that I am sharing that with you. So we take, in the world of my broker, which is going to remain unnamed at this point, we all take this responsibility. I should say most of us take this responsibility very carefully, and we have what's called an agency disclosure that we will be asking you to sign such that you understand that you are being represented by a fiduciary who would be that buyer's agent. So this is the first step into the process of buying or selling a piece of property. And it's a very important one, and it is embedded into the real estate contract. Now, a mystery, if we get to the next slide, is how do I get paid? You're the buyer. Are you going to have to pay me anything? How it works is the seller is the one who pays the commission. The commission is negotiable. That listing agent will negotiate with the seller as to how much. Now, let's say, usually it's between 4.5% and 6%. There's a lot that goes into it. I'm not going to talk with you about that right now. But let's say that we get a 6% commission. Now, 50% is going to go to the listing office. So let's say that the listing agent is Sally. Sally's office now is actually going to manage the dispersion of that money such that depending on Sally's production level, she has a certain split with her broker. Now, meanwhile, on the other side, let's say that the selling agent is Joe. Joe has a very similar situation with his broker. So there are 4 parties who are going to, for the most part, be getting a portion. There may be a co-listing agent, there may be someone else involved where, or a referral agent where a little bit more money is being distributed. But as the buyer, the practice is that you will not be paying the commission, that the seller will be paying that commission. But I have discovered that very few people really understand how we get paid. So I thought I would let you know that. So one of the you're going into this and you have visions in your head of a beautiful house, a garden, whatever that may be. What I'm sitting here thinking as the real estate agent is all of the legal processes. Now this here is just maybe half of what a file looks like that I end up managing for a buyer. And this doesn't actually even include all the seller disclosures. Now, a contract in the state of California, the CAR, California Association of Realtors, purchase agreement and joint escrow instruction comprises a number of pages which will cover items like agency, price, financing, the allocation of costs, who's going to pay what, seller versus buyer, what items will be included, is the refrigerator included, what's a fixture, is that excluded, time periods, Sean alluded to those. There are specific time periods that must be adhered to. When is the initial deposit given to the escrow company? What period of time might a seller have for a rent back? All of that is covered in this contract. Buyer's investigations. What are you going to investigate? Who is going to pay for those investigations? And another big part to this is breach of contract by either party. There's a huge paragraph in there on mediation of disputes. So this contract I take very seriously, and there's a lot of fine print. What I'm going to be doing is we're not going to be sitting and reading every single paragraph at that point, especially when we're in a competitive market. What I would do in a circumstance of working with a buyer is to sit you down. We're going to be talking about these things so that you understand what you're signing off on and your comfort level is already there. Because, for example, I just went to a broker open today. Wednesday is broker open in Novato. I asked, when will you be taking offers? Monday. Well, you as a buyer, you're working on Wednesday. By the time you get out to see the property Saturday or Sunday along with a whole host of other people, and you decide you have to make that snap decision, we've got to sit down and we've got to go through this contract, and we really have to know, how to present yourself so that you can in fact be competitive on all of those issues. Now, one of the issues that I really want to, I think, this is very important. No, not yet. An agreement is not an agreement until such time as it's ratified. So that's very important. And all of this is very legal processes that must be followed in the contract. So I think at this point we can go ahead and joint escrow instructions for the title company. There's another player here. That is the title company. You might see, if you were to drive down Grant Avenue, we have several title companies, or maybe we're down to 1 or 2 on Grant Avenue. But we have a number of them in the area. And they play a very important role. They are a third party to the transaction, and they are going to be dispersing funds to all the parties involved, be it the seller, the lenders, any lien holders, if the buyer perhaps paid for something. And actually we're going to be talking about this a little bit more because the rules of this are changing. homeowners association fees, any kind of fee, the commissions, anything that needs to be distributed, the escrow company is actually going to be holding those funds, initial deposits, increased deposits by the buyers, and then orchestrate by magic, wiring and what have you. A lot of paperwork is going to take place on their end to actually affect the distribution of funds. You will be working with an escrow officer. Typically, it is the buyer's choice as to who they want to work with. And another big part of what the title company does is that they provide title insurance. And there is a fee for that title insurance. And they're fairly competitively priced. Even if you were a cash buyer, I would advocate that you have title insurance, because by having title insurance, you ensure that should there be a defect of title, and you don't make that discovery right away because the preliminary title report, the map was kind of fuzzy and you were in a rush because that offer had to be in by Monday. 2 years later, somebody shows up and says, I have an interest in your property. That's when you turn back to the escrow company because you bought that title insurance, and then you can sit down and start having that lovely little discussion about who owns the property. And you can actually get damages reimbursed to you if something like that were to happen through your title insurance. So it's a very important component. So let's see, what else? Offers aren't cast in stone. So a seller has a lot of choices. They can accept the offer as presented, quickly, sign it off, and boom, you get your initial deposit to the escrow company. They could say, well, we like several things here. We like the fact that you're going to allow us to do the rent back. We like the fact that, your contingency period is, 10 days. All these things, except we don't like your price. So they will sign off to a certain extent, but counter back on price. And you then will have to decide if you want to come up with additional money or not. During that period of time, there's no ratified offer. So if buyer B walks in and offers everything that the seller wants, they could go ahead and ratify that offer with buyer B, and you're out of luck because there's not a ratified offer at that point. You can also say to the seller, I'm sorry, that's our price, and walk away. You're not in a ratified situation, so you have that control. The seller can outright reject your offer and say, go away, we were insulted, we don't want to deal with you. That does happen a lot. They can also ratify the offer, but while you are going through your contingency period, and a contingency period is defined as you are making sure that you can get your financing squared away. You're making sure that the house and all of your investigations are in fact, taking place, and that they're satisfactory to you. Now, we'll talk about that a little bit more, but in the meantime, another buyer, buyer B, can come in and go. If buyer A hasn't finished in a timely manner all of their investigations, we'd like to let you know, seller, that we're interested in buying the house. And then all of a sudden you start to see the sense of urgency. The buyer's agent is getting all these phone calls from the seller's agent or the listing agent who's going, has your buyer completed their investigations? Why aren't they doing this within 17 days? So again, it provides more urgency. And these kinds of things are important in a world of sellers versus buyers market. Now, a buyer can take their time typically when an inventory is higher because there are more choices for buyers. So this is something to keep in mind in the relationship that you have with your real estate agent. And following that advice as to what to do really becomes critical during that time. Now, one thing that's very important, the world of disclosures. It is the seller's responsibility to disclose what they know about the value, material, or concerning material fact that affects the value and desirability of a property. So let's say that they had to repair the bathroom floor because there was some dry rot. That is something that they have to disclose to you even if it happened 7 years ago. Now, what about if one side of the house had just tons of mold? They went ahead, they remediated it, and they've decided they're not going to tell you about it. Well, inevitably, you buy the house, and the neighbor who lives on the other side, who saw that wall come down, will knock on your door and go, well, did you know, so many years ago, they took that wall apart for mold, and you think maybe you were starting to smell something, but you weren't quite sure, and you didn't get a mold investigation, because those are very expensive inspections. Well, in that case, your seller essentially defrauded you. And what you can do at that point is turn around and, say, hey, you did not disclose this to me. At that point, there could very well be, and often are, lawsuits, and we are the world of deep pockets. And when you have in a seller's market, particularly where buyers are paying exorbitant prices for housing, the last thing they want to encounter is something like that. So, we're very aware of these things. So in the world of what the buyer is responsible for, it is the buyer's duty to perform those inspections. And there are any number of inspections. And actually, this file here, we have actually a preliminary title report. This is actually a given, but it will show the meets and bounds and homeowners association, liens and encumbrances, anything that affects the value and marketability of the property. We also have the homeowners association, and this is only a third of what these bylaws and articles of incorporation are. But if you're buying into a homeowners association, whether it's a single family or if it's townhouses or what have you, you may very well be governed by the homeowners association. So you're going to want to know exactly what's in here. And during that 17-day period of investigation, you better hope that the seller has this ready for you. And there's a clause in there that the seller has up to 7 days to give you all of their disclosures. Now, if you're suddenly getting this on day 6, and you're still in the middle of trying to get all of your investigations, it's very, very stressful. And you're going to want to rely upon an experienced agent who's going, okay, this is the important thing. We really need to make sure that they're reserved. We really have to check out whether or not they allow dogs greater than 25 pounds, or that you can park 2 cars here. I mean, whatever your issues are, they're going to be spelled out within the...
Can I jump in on that too? Because from a lending perspective, and when we're in the community of first-time homebuyers, the condominium, townhome type home has typically a lower entry price point. And so for those who are just getting into the market, seeing a $600,000 or $700,000 single family home and then seeing a $450,000 condo, we will be attracted to that price point. So there are great associations. You just need to do your due diligence in learning and investigating them. But one of the elements from a loan perspective is to say, you're going to pay the principal and interest in repaying that monthly mortgage that you're looking to borrow. We're going to look at how much the property tax is going to be for the year, and we divide that by 12 to get a monthly number. How much is homeowners insurance going to be? Well, I'm a single family home. I'm insuring the whole home and the land that I live on. But in a condominium, it's a little bit different. It's going to have HOA dues. What are HOA dues? Homeowner association dues. Those are going to be the association itself will then look to insure the roof on the building, the common area, the walls, and such. And maybe there's maintenance as far as if there's a community pool, et cetera, et cetera. But then also, we as a lender are going to say, well, we want you to insure the inside 4 walls of your property and know that the contents of what you have are insured as well. So it just adds another layer. The HOA dues are an important consideration when we look at debt to income in order to qualify. But make sure that it's a desirable place that you want to live.
And along these lines, there are also important considerations. For example, there are some homeowners associations here that will not allow you to rent out your place as soon as you buy it. That you must be a homeowner occupant for a period of 1 to 2, maybe even 3 years. There's also the issue of, and they do this to try to control the number of renters versus homeowners, which is actually a good thing because you want to really preserve the value of of what you buy into. You don't want it going downhill because suddenly you have 80% of the place is filled with tenants who don't care and throw parties. So during that 17-day period, and again, this is truly a full-time job. I see lots of eyes blazing over here. We have home inspection. So all of this is going to, there's a fee for all of these things. You need to be prepared for maybe about $1,200 worth of fees that you have for your homeowners. And you always want to get somebody who, the agent has worked with before. I just pulled these out of our drawer. I don't know that necessarily I would say let's work with this particular vendor, but it is an example of what a typical property report looks like. And if you'd like, you can pass these around to look at them. There's also the roof. And oftentimes you'll have the same company, will be doing the roof inspection along with the home inspection. Then we also have a pest inspection, so that the home inspector is not necessarily going to be looking for termites or rodents or any of those things, and that can really be a lot of damage here. So we have this report that we're having done, and what I typically am doing is I'm present at all of these inspections, and I'm really making sure that you are too, because it's so important that you're seeing the inspector, with their, their screwdriver, they're poking around, they're looking for that dry rot and that termite activity, and it's good for you to see that. Now, another thing that you're going to be looking at is the California Tax Disclosure Report, which is actually going to be embedded in your Natural Hazard and Combined Hazards Report, which is put together, a lot of components of this put together by the state of California as well as Marin County. We have a number of disclosures that pertain to energy efficiency, issues that are relevant to Marin County, for example, the SMART train. And my own company will have a number of disclosures as well. You're also going to be looking at the ability to get insurance, whether, if you're in a flood zone, the lender is going to require that you have flood insurance, and you're going to want to turn to, and we have a lot of houses in the flood insurance zone, or the flood zone here in Novato. So we have that as well. Now, another thing that is really important, and I advocate this for all buyers, especially when you're first coming into it. If you remember that first slide where I talk about how expensive initially you're adjusting to a whole set of new expenses. I advocate that you get a home warranty unless you're buying a house that is such a fixer that it's really not worth it. But if you're moving into something that has reasonable appliances, and maybe the water heater or the furnace is mid-span in its expected life period, that it would be worthwhile to go ahead and get a home warranty. So we have that as well. Am I getting ahead of myself? So anything that you wanted to do in the way of investigating the property, you certainly wouldn't want to. Another big one is sewer laterals. In the city of Novato, and actually practically throughout all of Marin, our housing inventory is old. We used to have clay pipes that we used to bring, human waste from the bathroom out to the sewer. A lot of those clay pipes have just collapsed under the weight of soil, or tree roots have gotten into it. So now we have sewer lateral cameras that go through to see whether or not these clay pipes are still functioning or not, and they may not be. And in that particular case, you may go, well, the seller should be replacing those. Well, the seller is going, guess what? That contract is an as-is contract, which, by the way, it is. And even though you're saying, well, gosh, I don't know if I want to incur $16,000 worth of cost to fix these clay pipes, and the seller's not going to do it, you as a buyer have to really sit there and think to yourself, how much am I willing to live with here? Probably the house that you're renting has pipes that are collapsing, unless maybe you live in a condominium association where those costs are taken care of for you. And if you're really shy or don't want to handle things like that, that then begins to affect, well, gee, I do want to be a homeowner, but I don't want to be involved to that extent. So then it might be worthwhile to start taking a look at alternatives to single-family houses, because single-family houses are more expensive to maintain over a longer period of time than a townhouse or a condo. So typical timelines in an escrow period.
We've talked about this. I mean, we talked about our
We did, yes.
Yep. So we've gone through a
Okay.
lot of this already. And
I think, have I covered everything?
I think we covered.
As you could see, I could just keep going on and on here.
I think what we'd love to do is wrap up our TV piece.
Okay,
And then have people have the opportunity to ask questions.
okay. I just want to, can I just do one little quick thing
Sure.
here? Because I feel like I left something important out. Maybe I didn't. I think I may have covered it all. I hope I haven't overwhelmed you, but these are the steps in the process. So with that,
Yeah, I think that from purposes of education, and what we're on offer, not only to you folks here, but those who might be watching on community television, to say that we appreciate the time spent here today, and we're here to be a resource for you and help you in that quest for home ownership. So probably wrap up the TV piece and then have the opportunity to answer any questions you guys may have.
I actually know there is one tidbit of information I wanted to wrap up with, and I'll pass these out as well. Just to give you an idea, in Novato, condominiums that were sold within the past 6 months up to $550,000. I have 17 pages, and there are 5 each on here. So that's quite a number of condominiums in Novato to give you a sense of hope that under the $550,000 price range. Now, when we get into single-family houses that have sold within the last 6 months for under $550,000, we have 17 houses, to give you an idea. And many of these are fixers. So now when we get up to Petaluma, in terms of houses sold within the past 6 months under $550,000, 27 pages. So if your heart is set on that single-family house, and if you don't have the resources to deal with a fixer, Petaluma may be a solution. So geography would really play an important part in your decision-making too. So I did want to get that in.
Sure. So we'd like to wrap up television part and then be able to say, do folks have questions? We've asked you a lot of things that you're looking to get out of this, okay? And we hope to have been able to provide some information about what's going on for first-time home buyers. I think, do you guys have, first off, any questions? You have, all right, here we go. All right, so we'll read this. How many months is a rental market?
Neutral market.
Is a neutral market.
Right. It's roughly about 6 months, let's say 5 to 7 months. That would be what's called a balanced market, where there's enough inventory for both parties.
How often do you use a card to keep an account open? How often do you need a card or use your card to keep it open?
That's a me question. Read it one more time just so I understand it. I'm sorry.
My apologies.
No problem. How often do you need to use a credit card in order to keep your account open?
Yeah.
So if you have it but you don't use
Yeah,
it,
great question. It falls under the use it or lose it clause, and it really depends. My suggestion is use it on a monthly basis. Don't let it go anywhere over a year, because at that point, depending on the creditor or the institution that's providing the credit, they do have latitude to close it out. You will be notified before it's closed out at this point. Back in the good old days, they'd just stop it, and you wouldn't know about it until you went to go and use it.
Okay, so there's a follow-up here. So as you develop better credit and you get better offers from card companies with lower interest rates, what is the value of having a long credit history on a higher interest card as opposed to a lower interest card that's a little bit newer, but that's much better for you?
Sure. What is the value? That's a subjective, and I would turn back to, in my opinion, keeping your credit cards paid off is best case scenario, so interest rate doesn't play in at that point. And there is significant value in keeping your credit at a significantly longer age than newer. Again, it's 15% of your credit score, so jumping from one credit card to the next is not suggested. Just keep them paid down.
Got it.
You have a question here? We'll come back to you.
About fiduciary responsibility, is the realtor's fiduciary responsibility only to the person that they are representing? In other words, not considering the dual agent who's representing, but suppose you find out in the course of the business that the seller is willing to drop the price. Can you tell that to the buyer that you're representing?
Well, let me take that question. To back up, you do have a fiduciary responsibility to the party that you are engaged with, and that agency relationship paper that you've signed off on kind of ratifies that. Now, let's say that I happen to discover, even though the seller hasn't disclosed, that the chimney, for some reason, I happen to be holding an open house and it was smoking. For whatever reason. And I would, in my disclosure, because I have an agent visual inspection disclosure, I would go ahead and I would note that. And I would certainly let you know, and also I would be letting the seller know through the listing agent that I happened to see that. They may or may not have known that there was a problem, whether they chose to or thought it was important to disclose. Now, I, in a relationship, fiduciary relationship with the buyer, would only know if a seller is willing to reduce the price is if the listing agent has come to me, unless I happen to, maybe I'm standing in line at a grocery store and inadvertently hear this. I mean, that kind of thing really isn't something that is as common as a listing agent calling and saying, you know, we're about to drop the price. You know, is your buyer interested? Before I put that price reduction on the MLS, would you like to get in and see it? So you might be given a little bit of a heads up for that reason. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, sort of in general. Yes.
Okay.
But your first responsibility is to the person you represent.
Yes, but we always, as real estate agents, we are operating under a license, and we must at all times be operating in fair play to both parties. So, you know, we can't really be out there trashing, you know, another party just for the fun of it or the heck of it.
Yes, go ahead.
I have a question for you, Phil, about, or Sean, I'm sorry, about how much is your pre-approval reduced if you go into an HOA? Because I was a little surprised that I was pre-approved, but then if you wanted to add an HOA to that, it just reduced the amount of my loan, like $40,000.
Yeah,
So can you go into that scenario a little bit so that people don't get like, oh, I got pre-approved, but then you're like, oh, well, there's an HOA of $300. No, we're not going to lend you that amount of money.
you know, when you're talking to your lender and you're going over your scenario and saying, I want to spend about $500,000. You know, I want to live in a home about $500,000, and it may be a condo, it may be a single-family home. So when I'm speaking in that scenario is to say, how much are HOA dues on average? Because we have to factor that in. Oh, they're on average around $350, $400. Okay, great. So we still have to figure out principal and interest, taxes, insurance, HOA dues. And so that's where the problem is that your debts have increased.
Right.
And so when someone's giving you a pre-approval, typically you're trying to pre-approve you for the max that would be allowed by the lender, okay? And to be able to say, okay, at 43, 45% debt to income ratio, for every $10,000 you make gross per month,
Right.
you can have $4,500 in debt per month. And so that calculation is principal and interest repayment on the mortgage you're borrowing. That is the real estate taxes divided on a 12 monthly basis, homeowner's insurance, and then any credit report debt that shows up. So when we talk about keep your payments low, keep your balances low, is that, oh, I've got a $10,000 debt on my credit card. I'm not worried from the lending side that you have $10,000. I'm worried about that minimum monthly payment number. And so that higher credit interest rate number saying, well, that might be a $350 monthly payment, and a lower credit interest rate number might be a $275 monthly payment. When you start shaving the numbers and massaging the numbers, that can mean something. And so when you take into that HOA due, then you're like, okay, I can't get you, I hit the ceiling, I can't qualify you for more.
So if the actual HOA covers the insurance, that's really not going to make your loan maybe go up because of that, because that's kind of increasing that amount that you're going to have to pay.
You're kind of paying two insurances here in a way. You're paying HOA, homeowners association dues, and a little small HO6 policy, which is the inside four walls of your unit. That might be $300-400 a year. It's pretty affordable, okay? But that's just the inside four walls. It's not the roof, it's not the walls, it's not the common area, and that's where your HOA dues are. And so where you have a lower price point, typically on a condo or a townhome, you have to be aware of where those HOA dues are as well.
Can I tag on a question? What does that do? Let's say she were to go in for a single family home, and now you're looking at her reserves, because now she's responsible for the roof, the walls, there's no common areas. So, it's just a question. How do you then weigh that? Because you're looking for a certain degree of reserve.
Well, yes, I think there's a little bit of two things going on here, the same question, but for me, I'm looking at, you're going to have instead of $300 or $400 insurance, you might have $800 or $900 in homeowners insurance, but you don't have HOA dues. Right. So there's a benefit there. I mentioned earlier, when we talk about assets, how much money do you have in the bank? We're going to look at your savings, checking, mutual funds, what monies do you want to use as an investment to down payment, but we also want to make sure there's some liquidity post-closing too. And so to be able to say, okay, based on the loan program you want, the loan program and the rate and everything all matches up, here's what the lender is going to require is having money outside after the loan closes.
And how much reserve do they want to pull back usually?
So depends on the program, typically if you're looking in the conforming products, what is that? It's a loan amount of $0 to $417,000 is a Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac conforming loan size. And then you have a next level, which is 417.01 to the high balance cost limit of that county. Here in Marin, it's a high cost area, and it's 625.5. Anything over that is considered a jumbo loan, okay? And just different rules, regulations, guidelines that are associated with each of those products. So it depends on what makes the most sense. I will tell you, the lender I represent, their jumbo goes from 417.01 on up. They don't have that 625, middle barrier. We're going to ask you for more reserves for that loan, but we're going to offer you a lower interest rate. Weigh the difference, weigh it out. What is it, can we do this, or not in your case?
So just one other quick question for you concerning closing costs. Is that always going to be the responsibility of the buyer, or can you ask the seller to pay some of the closing costs as well?
There are actually, for example, if this were the city of San Rafael, the seller traditionally will pay the city transfer tax. The buyer does not. So there are traditional or practiced ways in which, buyer will pay this for closing, seller will pay that for closing. However, it is all negotiable, and one area that I really wanted to cover is the new TRID, and we missed that because that's significant. Within the past month.
So, in October 3rd,
Yeah.
I live in a changing world. Every day I go to work, there's something new. And so there's new loans, new guidelines, new regulations. And a lot of this had to focus on what happened in 2007, 2008. So what happens now on an escrow time frame is to say, there are things that you've heard and read about in the past. There's a thing called a good faith estimate that's given to you at the beginning of the loan process. There's a thing called a truth in lending document that was provided to you at the beginning of the loan process. There's a thing called a HUD-1 settlement statement that goes over all the final fees. Gone. They don't exist. Okay, they've been around for many years, but now they're gone. New things have come in its place. There's a loan estimate that's replaced the GFE and the TIL, Truth in Lending, and there's a closing disclosure document that's now replaced the HUD-1 settlement statement. Similar in makeup, but you know what? That's one thing that the government actually has done a pretty good job on, is that they created a form that, wow, you can read it and go, oh, all right, I get this. That makes sense to me.
Average closing cost on a $500,000 loan is, say, what, $10,000?
Give or take, yeah, somewhere around there.
$10,000 for 5.
Yeah.
What are closing costs?
So closing costs are a variety of elements, but for me, I'm looking at title fees, escrow fees, appraisal fees, lender fees, recording fees, okay, that are all involved. And you know what, to be honest, it's like, oh, that's junk fund, that's junk monies, those are junk fees. Those are all entities involved in helping you buy your place, buy your new home. So those are the different fees, and there's various portions of what's needed. Now, the key thing when you're buying a home that's different than a refinance of a home is that the owner's title insurance policy is a one-time fee. So I'm going to want to protect my parcel, that I'm buying this parcel right here, I'm protecting this. And so I'm buying insurance that says if anyone has any encroachment on my parcel, I have insurance to help me protect that parcel I'm buying. You have that for the life you own the property. Should you you also, doing the same thing, are getting a lender's insurance policy, title insurance policy, because you're playing with other person's money. And you're saying, yeah, I'm going to provide an insurance policy for the lender that they have a right because they're lending you 80%, 90% of the loan amount in buying the place. If you refinance the home, you don't have a new owner's insurance, you have that, it's already done, but you would need a new lender's policy.
I would like to add something very significant to this, and this gets back a little bit to the question of working with the seller. Let's say you've gone ahead, you've done your investigations, you make that discovery that sewer lateral is crushed, and you think, okay, maybe I'm willing to do 6 of the repair, but would like the seller to do 6 as well. Time is of the essence because of this new rule that has come in. You are supposed to be finishing your inspections within that 17-day period, as well as asking that seller to come forward with some participation for repairing the sewer lateral. And let's say there's, a backup offer there. The seller's going to say, forget it. This is all on you. But let's say there isn't that backup and the seller's going, yeah, I've been on market now for 45, 50 days. This is the first offer. I would be willing to consider doing that. So immediately what we'll have to do, of course, there's all the paper to ratify this. Immediately then what I have to do is I have to run back to Sean and go, okay, start that paperwork that is required, because if we don't, it resets, and you know this better at this point.
What the key thing of the new rule is that the federal government has said, we want to protect the buyer on real estate transactions, and so we want the buyer to know exactly what they're paying for 3 days before they even sign the loan documents.
You're talking about closing costs and things like that, right?
Yep. So therefore,
And seller credits.
Yes, okay.
That's
All
it all factors in. You have an interest rate you're buying and an annual percentage rate, and that factors in those closing costs. So what's ends up happening here is with this new TRID, Respatilla. I mean, there's all these acronyms that I'm still trying to learn them myself. Yeah, but it's a protection for the buyer. But it has an unintended consequence to impact the escrow process, because if there's any changes in any kind of closing costs or any fees for whatever reason, seller credits, renegotiations.
And let's say that you were trying to get a $6,000 credit back, and you looked at this and you went, wait a minute, the lender's not going to approve this, because that's an additional $6,000 now that to your pocket, and they may end up deciding to adjust how much they want to give you. So it's really become this very, careful process.
This synergy has to be really on board with helping this. Is really what it boils down to, is professionals that work in the industry that know the nuances to be able to share that education with the consumers, because we do this every day all the time. You're out there doing what you do for a living all the time. We can't pretend to know what you're, about your side of the work. So it becomes very important, in today's market.
Well, actually, Anna.
Yeah, a quick question is for you, Margaret. It's and present company excluded. What is the protocol if you're working with an agent, as I say, present company, who you feel is not working in your best interest and looking out and being actively, getting what you're looking for, and you're just sitting there and waiting and not getting any calls, and you find that they're just...
I would say I would voice, you don't feel that the agent is working for you, and, try to find out what's going on in their world. And as long as you don't have a buyer agreement signed with that agent, you're free to move on.
I just thought if there was an exclusivity that if you start working with one agent, obviously because of all the paperwork and everything, you yourself would devastate.
No, the seller and the listing agent, and even then, I mean, if a selling agent, if a seller were grossly unhappy, agents get fired. Happens all the time. So, that's why it's really incumbent upon the agent to educate the client about what they're dealing with. It may very well be that you haven't heard anything from the agent because maybe the
I
agent...
just learned more information tonight in one night than I did from this other agent.
Well, then this has worked. I appreciate that.
Real quick, real quick, what Sean just did in terms of having these two components be in concert is huge. We're buying a home. It's $500,000 a lot of time. This neck of the woods, almost minimum. If you're not getting what you want or need out of the person who is guiding you through that process, call them out. And if they're not going to change their tune, fire them. Straight up. And same goes for a lender, a mortgage. Yeah.
The lender's got to be communicative and be able to respond and say, you know what, I'm not going to tell you you're pre-approved for $700,000 when you're not pre-approved, because my reputation's on the line too. When a listing agent's looking at it saying, are you kidding? Really? You pre-approved that person? No. So I want to be, and there's the harsh realities of credit and scores, and say, work, fix,
And
repair,
oftentimes we
come
start
back.
first with Eric before we move on.
This should be, for you, this should be a relationship,
Eric, with
not
the
a
credit.
transaction. Does that make sense? And whomever it is that you're dealing with, especially over here, I mean, that's how I'm built, but it should be a relationship, not a transaction.
Okay, so I have very basic questions. So,
Oh, go ahead.
So if I don't have the 20%, is there piggyback loans? They used to say that terminology. I don't know if that exists anymore. How does mortgage insurance?
There's various.
To avoid mortgage insurance, what else can you do?
There's varying levels of options available. Okay, and so probably realistically, we would sit down and talk to you about the different options. Okay, but there's FHA, which is a government-backed program. We only need 3.5% down payment. Okay, and it offers a low credit score entry point, and it offers really good low interest rates. There are some elements that you need to know in getting an FHA loan if it's going to work for you. That I don't want to go into all the details right now. That might say, I don't want to do an FHA loan. There are Fannie and Freddie guaranteed loans that you can do 5% down up to $417,000 loan amounts. We're only putting 5% down. You can go up to 625.5 loan with Fannie and Freddie that you only need 10% down. And then traditional is 20%. And, you know, if you have any other reserves, you know, you'll get breaks on your interest rate if you have more skin in the game. So there are varying levels that are out there.
Are your payments higher too, as if you go with the lower down payments?
Well, it would be, right, because you have a bigger loan amount.
Right.
So yes, your payments would have to be higher. You know, so that is an element that needs to weigh into and so there it may end up being maybe now's not the right time to buy, or you might need to look at an area where you might need to commute in, things of that nature.
And on the pre-approvals, I mean, how long is a pre-approval for? So 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, how far do you pre-approve if you have a commitment? What if I can't find a house within that amount of time? I mean, how does that do for you?
Very good question. So I think what ends up happening is that what in sitting down with the lender is to be able to say, here's my most recent documentation, you know, and it's up to date. It's latest 30 days pay stubs, latest 2 years tax returns, latest 2 years W-2s, latest 2 months bank statements. That's the traditional stuff, okay? And then we run your credit, we get you approved, okay? Here's the amount that you're approved for. You can confidently go out there, shop, look for a place, put offers on homes. 2 months goes by, 3 months goes by. Us as a lender want to be in touch. How's it going? How's it coming with? No, put in 5 offers, didn't get any of them. Okay, it's time to re-up your info. Time to give me the new updated bank statements, pay stubs, etc.
Don't buy a car during this time.
Yeah.
How is that credit inquiry going to affect my future lending?
So credit scores typically from a lender's perspective are good for 90 to 120 days. That you need to close a loan within that time frame. Okay, and so if you don't close the loan within that time frame, we are going to need to rerun your credit score. So I'm always telling people, you know, this is a process, it's a second job, and it's clean living. You know, it is, you know, keep paying your bills on time, don't have any huge life changes. If you do, you need to tell me, you know, I lost my job. I got a raise at my job. The car broke and I had to buy a new car. Well, those things all need to be weighed into that overall equation.
Given the shortage of homes in the area, it is more, I'm getting the multiple offers that each home is getting. So if you have a 120-day period of that loan, and I'm the one that's struggling with, the 20% down payment, or the cash.
Mm-hmm.
So my chances of getting a house within that time frame is lessens. So how is that going to affect my credit score if I have to rerun my credit for a future? How many points are we looking at?
I will say it depends, but all things being equal, meaning there are no major adjustments to the rest of your credit profile, a nominal impact in terms of negative. And again, it depends on the rest of what's going on. I'll also suggest that depending on the loan and lending institution, credit's pulled up front, and please correct me if I'm wrong, credit is pulled up front, it's also pulled right before everything closes. So you really want to be squeaky clean from the time you are approved, you get your approval letter, all the way through the process of signing all the documents, because it matters what you do in that time period.
So let's say my husband and I are qualifying for a loan, and we both have different FICO scores. How is that weighted? Which one is weighted? Is it an average?
So you have 3 scores, and realistically what a lender's going to do is take the middle of the 3 scores for both of you and compare them. Okay, so if you have a 640, 650, 660 credit borrower, and you have a 740, 750, 760, 750, 650, we compare them. Now, if you're the higher income earner of the 2, then we'll take your credit score. If most and that's for a specific program, but most other lenders are going to take the lower middle score. So then that does impact your ability to qualify. If you have a 640, 650, 660, like that 650 mid-score borrower who's making, 90% of the income, and then you have an 800 credit score borrower who's making 10% of the income, that tells us we need to do some credit repair, improvements to get that person up with their scores. Okay.
One more question, sorry. And on the credit card portion of it, so let's say you have 0 debt on credit cards, but you do have let's say, zero interest credit card, I mean, I don't want to pay it off, why should I? I mean, I'm paying zero interest on it. So is it recommended to just pay it off and have zero whatsoever, or
Just get the ratio down. Get the ratio down to under that 29% barrier. That will optimize the score. I understand what you're saying. You don't want to spend the money if you don't have to, if it's at 0%. But to help your but to help your ratio, get it down to that 29 or 100%.
I'd like to address the statement of it taking so long to find something. I would work with you to find out why that is happening, because it's, there are houses out there, and there are ways to approach sellers. Now, if it's so competitive that everywhere you go there's a herd, I would suggest, for example, and I've done this with a buyer, it's not always the most ideal situation, but it really depends upon how well educated you are, as well as how flexible you are, that there are sometimes buyers are walking into houses with a contractor in hand. And they are relying upon that contractor to go through all the systems within the house. They're not necessarily getting the reams of reports. But at the very least, what they're saying to the seller is, I'm offering you something. And oftentimes a seller might come in and say, I would prefer to work with somebody who's not going to hold me hostage to, here's a home report that didn't come in, exactly right. I'll be willing to work with them for $10,000 or $15,000 less than my asking price. And this does happen because sellers are so, especially in a seller's market, they're so concerned that they're going to be nickeled and dimed, and that's how they perceive it. And you as a first-time home buyer, especially if you're not really comfortable with maintaining a home, and you're looking at older houses, just like we saw with the number that are here, you really have to go in with a constitution as to whether or not you want to tackle that, or if not, then consider getting into a condo. I mean, these are the kinds of choices that you would have to make, but it really shouldn't, even in a seller's market, it should not be taking you, 3 to 6 months to get an offer accepted.
What I'd like to do is allow us, if people need to go, right? We certainly appreciate all your time. We're here to help answer questions, and we're here to be able to meet with each and any one of you that are interested one-to-one. And we're not here to solicit, right? We're here to just offer ourselves as resources. But we thank you so much for your time. That's important, and hope that it's been helpful to you. Okay, tell your friends. So again, we should wrap it up, right? And
yes,
so then
we should.
You guys feel free to stay, and we're here to, as we clean up, we're here to help answer.
Whoa.
See,
wow.
It's time to go. It's time.
He's telepathic. Okay.
So thank you guys.
Oh, and I do have a review. If somebody would just take a few minutes to give us feedback on what you thought of the seminar, I'd appreciate it. Oh, thank you so much for coming, and I hope that you enjoy the programming.